We are live with some Mr Ballen. Just gonna wait, see if anyone comes in here to join. I doubt anyone will off the top of my head. That's okay. It's all good. We got 2 reactions here. 2 Mr Ballen videos to react to. So it's gonna be kind of fun, actually. I didn't plan to do a live stream today, but it just kind of happened. I just kind of felt bored, so I said, why not? We gonna get right into this. I'm gonna put a poll up on my thing. Give me a second to get my phone. We just gonna let the people know we're live here. Alrighty, we're just gonna get right into this. I'll have to just check every once in a while for a chat, see if anyone has come and chatted. But we're gonna get right into this first one, which is Top 3 Photos with Disturbing Backstories Part 22. Are you guys ready? Of course you're ready. Let's go.
3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to share the photo that is famously associated with them. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please become a surgeon at the hospital located closest to where the like button lives, and then eventually, when the like button goes in for very minor outpatient surgery, accidentally perform a craniectomy on them. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Let's.
Just after midnight on June 17th, 1939, a crowd of people began to form outside of this unremarkable building in Versailles, which is a city in France. The atmosphere in this crowd was electric. They all knew why they were there. They knew what they were about to see, but even still, there was a lot of nervous anticipation. And so as such, some people were coping with these nerves by drinking alcohol and trying to laugh and have a good time, while others were much more subdued and were trying to be respectful about what they were about to witness. Between 1 and 2 a.m., the doors of this unremarkable building opened up, and a group of men dressed in the same dark uniforms came out and didn't say a word to the crowd, and the crowd immediately went silent and began to back away from them. And this group of men, they walked right out in front of this building, and they had lumber and they had tools with them, and they began constructing this kind of strange wooden structure. And so the crowd, they wanted to get up close to see what these guys were doing, but at the same time, they didn't want to get too close. And so as the crowd formed a sort of half moon around these men that were doing the constructing were moving so seamlessly, like all of them had built this structure dozens of times before, and it was just muscle memory. And so by about 3 a.m., this structure was built, and they placed this large basket next to the structure, and then these men packed up their tools and the remaining pieces of lumber, and they turned around and they went right back inside the doors into the building and were gone. At this point, the crowd had become quite sizable outside of this building, and they were growing kind of restless because they knew now that this structure was built that the next time those doors open, the show is really going to start. This spectacle they are all there for, it's about to happen. And the crowd all knew that this event couldn't happen if the sun was up, because if the sun was up and the area was well lit, the press would be able to take pictures and film it, and that's not what officials wanted. They wanted this to happen in the darkness. But for whatever reason, things seemed to be getting delayed inside of this building. And so the crowd was just getting more and more restless. People are getting more and more drunk, and they're getting louder and more disruptive and boisterous. And then around 4:45 a.m., the sun had come up. And so the press was out in full force with their cameras trained at the doors of this building. And so the crowd really at this point is not actually expecting this event to take place, because at this point it just seems totally unlikely. But at 4:50 a.m., those doors swung open, and standing in the threshold was 31-year-old Eugene Weidman, who was a convicted serial killer. His arms were tied behind his back, and the collar of his white shirt had been tucked down inside because they needed his neck to be free and clear because he was about to be beheaded. So,
hold on. Wait a minute. You're telling me? Now, I'm completely out of the loop when it comes to laws and rules and all that. You're telling me there was a time frame where they just you could just go and watch a beheading, an execution of a human being? Just have a little gather, hang out with your boys, and just go watch a man be beheaded? You're telling me this was a thing that could be done? What the I'm baffled. I am baffled by what I've just... What? I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know... That actually perplexed me. I didn't actually know you could just go watch... Jesus.
So the two guards on either side of Eugene, they pulled him forward out towards the crowd so the executioners behind him, who were dressed all in black, could filter out and take up positions alongside the guillotine, which is that wooden structure that had been built earlier in the morning. And so as Eugene is being brought out towards the crowd and everything is getting set up for his execution, the crowd went wild. They were shrieking and howling and laughing and pointing and booing and just generally being completely rambunctious and totally bloodthirsty. Eugene kept his head down. He did not want to...
This is in French, right? Am I correct with this? I'm just gonna double check chat here quickly, make sure nothing's going on. Okay, no chat yet. I'm gonna have to do this every once in a while, so I apologize. Actually, my phone will probably be used to the chat thing. I won't do that again. But like, to think that people could just, try how to word this. To think people would just be this bloodthirsty and this brutal and all that for a public beheading is insane to me. Like, what the hell type of crap was going on here? Insane.
look at the crowd, and he did not want to look at the guillotine. And so eventually the two guards turned him and walked him directly towards the base of the guillotine, at which point the executioners that had taken up their positions around this device, they grabbed him and slid him forward so he was on his stomach on top of this wooden platform, the guillotine, and they slid him forward until his head poked through this opening at the very far end, at which point his neck was positioned right under this huge blade that was dangling right above him, and his head was positioned over a metal bucket on the ground, which he would be looking directly at. At this point, the crowd was at a fever pitch, and one of the executioners pulled a lever. The blade came soaring down, and it removed his head. His head fell into the bin, and the executioners pushed his torso into the basket that had been placed out there earlier. And then the executioners and the prison guards, they gathered up Eugene's body parts and went right back inside of the building, which was a prison. At this point, the crowd was cheering and going wild, and they ran up and began dabbing their scarves and their handkerchiefs in Eugene's blood, which was on the...
You sick freaks! Those sick freaks, in fact! What's wrong? Why was men's people so fucking insane? Why is this a thing, you sick freaks? My brain is baffled by this. How is this a thing that happened?
Ground as a sort of souvenir from having been at this execution. And of course, because the sun had been out for this entire spectacle, all of this had been captured on film. And so later that day, and for the next couple of days, the headlines all over France were about this bloodthirsty crowd that was cheering as this man was beheaded.
Absolutely, you should be talking about that if you're the media. That's it just shows how insane and bloodthirsty and that people were. Like, to think they're gonna dab handkerchiefs in a man's blood and all that. What are you doing with that afterwards? Like, it's insane. I'm literally just baffled by this.
And it just overall made France look really, really bad. And so French leaders decided that from that point forward, they could no longer do any more public executions. So
I can see fucking why. That sounds like a terrible idea to begin with. Seems like a terrible idea to be doing in the first place.
the guillotine would continue to get used for decades beyond this point, but it was all behind closed doors. Also, random fact about being beheaded by a guillotine: your head, after it's been separated from your body, stays conscious for about 10 to 12 seconds, so they say. And apparently there's been lots of cases where the executioner, after the condemned has had their head removed, will yell the name of the person who has just had their head removed, and that person's head will look over at the person calling to them and will blink or try to mouth words for several seconds before the lack of oxygen kills the brain and then the head is no longer conscious. Here are some of the more notable pictures that were used in the media from Eugene Weidmann's execution. In the early 1900s, Eben Byers was a man who other people envied. He was born into a very wealthy family in New York City. He attended Yale University in Connecticut, which is a very prestigious Ivy League university, and he was devilishly handsome. After his college graduation, he didn't need a job because his family was so rich, and so instead he focused his time on a passion of his, which was golfing. And in time, he became this world-class golfer, going so far as to win the 1906 U.S. Amateur Tournament, which is the biggest amateur golf tournament in the world that most of the winners go on to become professional golfers. And so Eben most likely would have followed that path and become a pro golfer had his father not just handed over the very successful metalworking business that he started that made his family wealthy in the first place.
Can you imagine? You're already a rich dude, right? Your family's rich. Go right into a rich situation. Then you're like, well, I'm gonna work on my tennis and all that stuff. You know, golf. I think it was golfing, right? Was it golf? Yeah, golfing. Hold on, I want to make sure I don't have information wrong.
Winners go on to become professional. The biggest amateur to win the...
Yeah, it was golfing, okay. So. But imagine you're doing that, you're into golfing, right? You're trying to get into some golfing. And as you're trying to get into golfing, your father, successful father, just walks over there. He goes, here's this business, this metalworking business, a successful metalworking business that made us rich. Here you go. Make us more, here's more money. Just it's stuff like this that just shows the insaneness of people. Like how insane things can go, and how just easily some people have it in life. It's insane. I couldn't imagine it. I don't want to imagine it, in all honesty.
Wealthy in the first place. And so Eben stopped his golf career and became the chairman of this incredibly successful company. And so overnight, he basically went from being just rich to being uber rich, making more money than he could possibly spend. But Eben did attempt to spend his money. He pretty much immediately began buying up luxury properties all over the country. He bought horse racing stables in the United Kingdom and in America, and he bought an entire...
Why would you buy a horse racing thing in the United Kingdom for? You live in America. I think, right? Am I correct with this? I may have misheard this, but I swear, right? Like, he lives in America. And he's got a fucking land... What the hell? Why?
Entire luxury box at Forbes Field, which is where the Pittsburgh Pirates...
He just bought a box in the... Actually, that sounds like a kind of fun idea. I do like that one. That's the only one he's done so far that I was like, I'd want to do that.
This professional baseball team used to play. And so in addition to owning all these incredible things, Eben also, through his role as chairman of this company, began connecting with and befriending very powerful and influential people like the founders and executives at the Coca-Cola company. And so all in all, Eben's life was really going quite well until 1927. That year, Eben was 47 years old, and he took some time off from gallivanting around the world and rubbing shoulders with famous people to go catch a football game at his alma mater at Yale University. So he hops on a train, he rides to Connecticut, he watches this game, and then after...
I'm surprised his ass would go on a train. Plus, he's not the dipshitted person, because you know these people exist, those type of dipshitted people that just go... Thinks they're above doing stuff like that. They're just above going on trains with with the peasant people and all that crap. That's why he would go on a train.
Afterwards, he gets back on the train to head back to Pittsburgh, and this is a very long ride. It's over 12 hours long, and so Eben naturally bought a first-class ticket, and so he was inside of a train car that had bunk beds for passengers to sleep on during the ride. And so Eben climbed into a top bunk, and he fell asleep. A few hours later, after the train is well on its way to Pittsburgh, Eben, in his sleep, manages to roll to the side of the bed and actually falls out of his bed onto the ground.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't. I really should. I just find that funny when that happens. I'm sorry. When someone how do you just the thought to me that you just roll off your bed is just really funny to me. I'm sorry. I just find it funny. I don't know why. I just do.
He lands hard on his left side, it wakes him up, and as he stands up, he thinks he's okay, but then he feels this shooting pain in his left arm. So he's moving his arm around, he's not really sure what's wrong with it, but he's hoping it's just some bruising, and so he decides to get back into his bunk and just go back to sleep. And so he manages to fall asleep despite the pain, and then when they roll into the station in Pittsburgh several hours later, he wakes up, and right away he feels that pain in his left arm. And so after getting off the train and going back...
Okay, well, I don't want someone to be damaged arm because of the fact they fall off a goddamn bunk bed.
Back to his house and dropping off his luggage, he went right to his physical therapist's office to ask him if there was anything he could do to help with the pain in his arm.
So you never thought to go to a doctor? You went to a physical therapist? Unless I misunderstand, I don't know if that's the person that diagnosed you when you have pain. Like, I'm pretty sure a doctor would have to look at you beforehand and decide that fact, but apparently, maybe I just don't understand how logical works, but I would think you need to have the doctor look at it before you could go see a physical therapist for it. Tell me if I'm wrong.
And so the physical therapist examines Eben's shoulder and determines that, there's no structural damage to his arm, but obviously Eben is in pain. And so he says, look, there's a new product that came online that's quite expensive, but since you're a man of means, maybe it's something you want to consider. It's called Radithor, and it's supposed to dull aches and pains, and it's supposed to give you this huge boost of energy. And so, maybe you want to try that. And so Eben was really excited at the notion of taking this new health tonic and said, yeah, let's do it. And so his physical therapist wrote him a prescription for Radithor. Eben took the prescription and he went to the drugstore. He picked up a half-ounce bottle of this liquid. He went back to his house and, as prescribed, he drank a very small spoonful of this liquid. And right away, he felt this surge of energy, the pain in his arm started to fade, all the things this health tonic claimed to be able to do, it was doing. And so over the next couple of days, Eben very diligently every day took the prescribed amount, a very small spoonful of this Radithor, and every day he felt better and better and better. Not just the pain in his arm, but overall, he felt happier, he felt fitter, he felt alive, and he was attributing all those feelings to this miracle tonic. And so he began taking more and more of this tonic, well beyond what was prescribed, to the point where he was...
Ooh, addiction can cause the worst, and that's what's happening here. This man is addicted. Addicted to this stuff. Addicted to what is happening. Ooh, addicted because he feels good. It gives him a little boost of energy, so now he just wants it all the time. Ooh, that come back to bite you in the ass.
Was drinking 3 full bottles of Radithor every single day. And so...
Woo! I don't know. I don't even know what Radithor is, and I should mess you up. You don't take 3 bits of any, medication a day. None of it. Don't take 3 of them at all a day. None of them, no matter what it is.
So for years he did this, and it was all going great until his jaw fell off. Literally, in 1930...
Did he just say his jaw fell? Hold on, we'll go back. I know he did not just say till his jaw fell off. This mother trucker did not just say till his jaw fell off. No way, he didn't say that.
It's all going great until his jaw fell off.
Oh my god, he actually did say until his jaw fell off. He actually did say till his jaw fell off. Well then.
Literally, in 1931, one day, his lower jaw just separated from his skull and went slack. And so the reason this happened was because Radithor was actually just radioactive water. In the early...
Who thought that was a good idea? Who would have, we need to make, I got it. I got the thing that's gonna help everybody. Let's make radioactive water a thing. And call it Radithor. And there's no way anyone would figure out what it is. And they just think it's some miracle stuff because they make them feel good. It turns out they just become radioactive. They all just started fist pump. What the hell? What's wrong with people? What the hell?
In the 1900s, the radioactive element radium was believed to have highly curative properties with no side effects. And so naturally, at the time, dozens of health products were created with radium being their main ingredient. And Radithor was one of those products. It was literally just water and radium. And so after consuming over 1,400 bottles of Radithor over a 3-year...
14,000! You're like 14,000 in 3 years. Jesus, Lord of hell. That is a lot. That's so many. That's so much. That's so much radioactiveness. That's top tier. That's a man who's top tier radioactive. Holy shit.
Year period, Eben's body was finally just starting to disintegrate from the inside out. After he had his jaw surgically removed, along with large portions of his upper jaw, the rest of his body also just began to crumble. And so by the end of 1931, when his story was making headlines all around the world about the dangers of Radithor and really more specifically the dangers of radium, Eben had become completely bedridden and his skull was now beginning to disintegrate. There were holes forming all over his skull that were exposing portions of his brain. And so...
Oh my god! This dude went from being a rich man who he formed this addiction to radioactive water. And he became so radioactive that his jaw started to fall off. There started to become holes in you can see his brain. That sounds horrible. That sounds terrifying.
By 1932, Eben was dead. Eben was buried in Pittsburgh, and he was buried inside of a lead-lined coffin that was designed to absorb any of the radiation emitting from his bones. And then 30 years...
I mean, that makes sense. You don't want him just being... just radioactiveness just going into the freaking air and that and fucking air in there.
After he was buried, so in 1965, scientists actually exhumed his skeleton to see if it was still emitting radiation. And they determined it was still emitting the same levels of radiation as when he died. And they actually would ultimately figure out that radium, this radioactive element, has a half-life of 1,600 years. So what that means is Eben's body will remain highly radioactive for centuries. Here is a picture of Eben with his jaw surgically removed. It was taken shortly before he passed away.
What the fuck? I have no idea what to say to this. Oh my god.
There is still some debate about what exactly happened in this story that I'm about to share with you. And so for transparency, in this video, I am going to rely on the narrative that was presented in court by the defendant. And so with that in mind, here we go. On the afternoon of December 3rd, 2012, a freelance photographer working for the New York Post newspaper named Umar Abbasi was walking down the stairs of the 49th Street subway station in New York City. This very busy station is located only a few blocks away from the very famous Times Square. And so after Umar made his way down to this underground subway station, he walked over to one of the big automated kiosks that looks like an ATM, and he purchased a subway ticket. And then with his ticket, he walked over to the turnstiles. He slid his ticket through the slot, pushed past the turnstiles, and was now standing out on the actual train platform. And from where Umar was standing, this platform basically was like a huge sidewalk that stretched all the way to his right a couple hundred feet and all the way to his left a couple hundred feet. And in front of this platform were the actual tracks down below, because the train, when it came out of the tunnel, it would actually come right up alongside this platform with almost no clearance between the platform and the train. As such, the leading edge of the platform, basically the lip of the train platform that's closest to the train tracks, has this big yellow line painted all across it to keep commuters from standing too close to the edge, because if the train came through, they could actually get hit by the train. And so as Umar is standing on this platform and he's looking left and right, it's totally crowded with people, and they're all kind of tucked back against the wall away from this yellow line. And so Umar decides he's going to turn right and wait at the right end of the platform, just because he saw down at the far end there appeared to be a gap in people, and he figured he could stand right there. And so Umar begins navigating past all of these people on the right side of the platform, and for the most part, everyone he is passing either has their head buried in their phone, or they're listening to music, or both. Because the thing about riding trains, especially trains in busy cities, is none of the commuters want to talk to anybody else. They want to be completely left alone. And so as Umar is walking, everyone was basically doing that. But at some point, he did pass two people that were engaged in a pretty heated conversation. Umar had no idea what they were arguing about, or if they were even arguing at all. He didn't know who these people were, but he took mental note of the fact that two men were kind of bickering with each other. And so he walked past them, didn't give it much of a second thought, and he arrived at a gap in the gaggle of...
I do love the fact that the subway is just a place where every grumpy human being just goes to. Every angry curmudgeon just shows up at this thing with the goal just to be an angry human being. Like, no one is happy to be going on a subway. Like, everyone who shows up there just hates everyone else.
people waiting for the train, and there he just stood well back of the yellow line, where he pulled out his camera and began clicking through the images he had taken earlier in the day at an earlier photo shoot. And so as he's clicking through these pictures, he starts to notice that those two men who had been bickering before are now straight up yelling at each other. They're screaming obscenities at each other. It's not clear who's fighting about what or who was the aggressor, but it's very obvious that at this point they're fighting. And so Umar looked away from his camera and looked left down the platform towards these two guys. And so these two guys are about 100 to 125 feet away from him. And all the people that were standing in the vicinity of these two men are beginning to migrate away from them. They just don't want anything to do with them. Because the thing about being in subways, especially in cities like New York, is there's lots of people that go down into these train stations that are inebriated or mentally unstable. And so very strange and bad behavior is just kind of a normal thing. And people tend to just kind of ignore it.
My apologies. I didn't expect a random sneeze.
And so that's what's happening. People are kind of walking away from these two fighting men, doing their best to pretend it's not happening. And so Umar spent a couple more seconds staring down the platform at these two men, but eventually just shrugged and thought, you know what, whatever problems they have, they're not mine. And so Umar went back to his camera and continued to click through his pictures when all of a sudden he hears a scream coming from the left side of the platform. But it was not a scream that sounded like it came from either of these two men. And so Umar looked up from his camera and looked left down the platform, and now he just sees chaos. It's people running away from these two men. People are running to get away from whatever is happening around them. And so Umar's thinking these men must have come to blows and they're now fighting actively, physically with each other. But when finally the crowd kind of cleared for a second, he saw a woman pointing down at the train tracks right in front of where those two men had been standing. And so Umar looks at the woman and he follows her finger down onto the tracks, and he sees there is now a man, one of the two men who had been fighting, laying face down on the train tracks. And then, to Umar's horror, he looks up down the tunnel where the train would come out of, and he sees the headlights of the train. It is now coming into the station. And so Umar starts running down the platform to try to get to this man to pull him out of the tracks. And as he's running, he pulls out his camera and he turns the flash on and he holds the shutter down and he aims it at the train conductor to hope the flashing of his camera will alert the train conductor to put on the emergency brake and stop the train before he hits this guy down on the tracks. And so as Umar is running, trying to signal
there was no way he could have stopped that train. That train's gonna go at a speed. That train is not gonna be able to stop. No way. There is no way that train would be able to stop. That dude, once he fell on that track and that train was even visible, he was doomed if he couldn't get up.
this train conductor. The man down on the tracks tries to stand up, and Umar sees he's really struggling to stand, and when he finally gets up, he turns and he grabs the edge of the platform and he tries to pull himself up and out of the tracks, but he doesn't have the strength or the coordination. And as Umar is getting closer and closer, but he's still too far away to help, he sees that this guy down on the tracks is not going to be able to get out of there before the train hits him. And so Umar finally comes to a stop, and he watches as this man down on the tracks lets go of the lip of this platform and just turns and faces the train like he knows what's about to happen. And then seconds later, the train, although it did try to stop, impacted this man and killed him instantly.
Oh yeah, you ain't gonna survive that. Train, a subway, just bam right in there. Yeah, you gonna not survive that. You gonna get got from that train. That train taking every single part of you, is beating you with it. That train don't care about your ass at all.
The man's name was Kaisa Khan, and he was 58 years old.
Kaisa
when the police
Khan.
finally showed up, they arrested the other man who...
I'm just gonna say the worst name I think someone could have is Suck in their name. I'm just saying it. I'm not gonna... It's not meant as an insult, but just the worst name to have and middle name to have is Suck.
Han had been fighting with. He was a 30-year-old named Naeem Davis, and Davis would actually tell police that he had been fighting with Han and he had pushed him onto the tracks, but it was in self-defense. However, that self-defense story didn't stop him from being charged with murder.
Of course, they don't gonna freaking... I mean... I would have to know the story. I'm pretty sure Mr. Ballen's gonna tell it, but to me, let me know what you think. If you shove someone onto train tracks. Is that self-defense? Like, I guess it would depend on the situation, right? Like, that's what my brain thinks, that if they grab you and then you're, like, right next to the tracks, and you, like, move your hand and release, and then they fall, okay, maybe. But if you, like, shove them aggressively, I don't think that works as self-defense. I don't think it does. I just want you all to tell me what you think there.
While Davis sat in jail waiting for his trial, the media and the public at large had already come to the conclusion that Davis was guilty. And this was due in large part to a particular picture. As Umar was running down the platform, holding up his camera, holding the flash down, trying to flag the train conductor to get him to stop, Umar was also taking dozens and dozens of pictures. And those pictures were of Han right before he was struck by the train. And so after Umar ultimately discovered he had taken these pictures, he gave them to his employer, the New York Post newspaper, and the day after the incident, they ran on the front page a picture of Han right before he's about to be killed with the headline, "Doomed." And so once the public saw this picture, nobody could believe that Davis was anything other than a cold-blooded killer for pushing this poor innocent man onto the tracks. But as it would turn out, nearly 5 years later, when Davis did finally get his trial, he was acquitted of...
Hold on, did he just say 5 years later?
Nearly 5 years later...
Why does it take 5 years for a trial to take place? How long was this man... So this man was sitting in jail for 5 years before he even got into court? How shitty is this court system? You can't justify that to me. 5 years waiting for a trial? Jesus.
When Davis did finally get his trial, he was acquitted of all charges because it turned out Han was very drunk and had picked a fight with Davis, and Davis was filmed on more than one occasion.
Hey, Kylie, hey, I saw you. I can see the chat from my phone. Hello.
On the platform, trying to get Han to leave him alone. And so finally, after Han began making death threats and then grabbed Davis's shoulder, Davis turned around and pushed him, and Han, being drunk, stumbled and fell backwards onto the tracks and then was ultimately killed. Here.
Okay, I missed one thing because I need to go back for a second. Apologize. I just want to know what started this. So we'll go here. No? Okay, we'll go here. I need to hear this again.
Trial, he was acquitted of all charges because it turned out Han was very drunk and had picked a fight with Davis, and Davis was...
What, he just saw him on the thing and just thought, I'm gonna fight you? Just decided, hey, fuck it, I'm just gonna pick a fight with this guy. You're the guy I'm gonna pick up. He came to drunk and looking for a fight, so he picked a guy to fight with. What the hell? What do you think? What do you think was gonna happen? Again, he's drunk, so he's not thinking that clear. But what do you think is gonna happen when you go looking for someone to fight in a freaking subway station? I don't know if you thought I'd get pushed on the track, but you couldn't have thought that was gonna end well.
Was filmed on more than one occasion on the platform trying to get Han to leave him alone. And so finally, after Han began making death threats and then grabbed Davis's shoulder, Davis turned around and pushed him, and Han, being drunk, stumbled and fell backwards onto the tracks and then was ultimately killed. Here is the infamous photo of Han on the cover of the New York Post newspaper.
Okay, listen, it's a shitty situation. That is a fantastic shot. Like, that is a fantastic shot. There's a reason that man, the guy who took the picture, was a photograph for a newspaper. That is a fantastic visual shot. Wow. Oh my god, what a shot that is.
So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp.
Alrighty. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not done yet. Who knew? We're not done yet. We got one more. We got one more. And the next one is called This Trail is a Death Trap. If you know the story, you might know what's going on. I don't. I'm gonna find out what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys ready for this one? Of course you're ready, because you would probably not be watching if you weren't ready, obviously. Yeah, so this one is called This Trail is a Death Trap. Let's go.
Today's story is about a hidden message found on the side of a mountain and how its contents changed the lives of 3 people forever. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan...
By the way, this is a long one. This one's 39 minutes, like 39 minutes long. So this is a really long one, so be prepared. We're going to be in here a while.
And of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak...
Oh yeah, there's a live stream. We ain't giving you 1, we're giving you 2 Mr Ballen videos on the live stream. Oh yeah. Hell, I'd do more, but I'm pretty sure you'd all get sick of me for 3. We're only giving you 2 here. Also, this one's 39 minutes long. This one's gonna be a while.
Sneak into the like button's house and warm up both sides of their pillow before they fall asleep. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
What are the odds?
24-year-old Gina Allen and her brand new boyfriend, 28-year-old Brandon Day, could not believe their luck. For the past 48 hours, they had been stranded in the rugged wilderness of the San Jacinto mountain range in California when they looked down into this ravine and they saw a campsite. There was a tarp that had been strung up between 2 trees. And so they ran over to it hoping that the owner of this campsite would be in there and they could help them get out of these mountains. But when they got to the campsite, there wasn't anyone there. But from the looks of it, it looked like someone had been living in this site fairly recently. Underneath this makeshift roof from this tarp was a sleeping pad, there was a warm sweater, there was shoes, there was a disposable razor, some kitchen utensils, and there was a yellow backpack. Without any hesitation, Brandon and Gina, who were totally famished and they're exhausted and they're desperate, they just start rifling through the different things in camp, hoping to find some things that will help save their life, like a cell phone or a radio or even just a lighter or some matches or some food. And so Brandon focused on all the items that are just kind of laying out under the tarp, and Gina focused on the contents of the yellow backpack. And so Gina, she opens up this backpack and she starts pulling out all these maps that are inside. And she notices on the margins of these maps in the white space, there is handwriting, and it's done in pen, and it looks like it's been written fairly recently. Now, at first, she didn't read any of the notes that were on these margins. She was just kind of pulling them out and stacking them on the ground next to her and continuing to rummage through this bag. But at some point, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed on the top map that was sitting on the ground next to her, there was a particular note at the top of the page that as soon as she saw it, she stopped what she was doing, she turned and looked at it. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and in fact, she didn't want to get her hopes up, but she slowly reached over, she picked the map up, and she put it right in front of her face, and as soon as she was reading it, she just started laughing. She was so happy, she was so relieved, she yelled to Brandon to come over and look at this. And so Brandon stopped what he was doing, he turned around, and he bent down, and he looked exactly where she was looking, and when he read what she had read, he started laughing too. They were saved. There at the top of this map, there was a note that was dated the same date as the day they were there, May 8th. And so they knew whoever had written this had written it at least in the last couple of hours because it was May 8th. Okay. And so they had to be around here somewhere. And so Gina and Brandon, they stand up and they start yelling out for the owner of this camp to please come out and help them. But in their excitement, Brandon and Gina had overlooked a critical detail in this note. And it would turn out that critical detail would change their lives and the life of the man who owned this camp forever. Before Brandon and Gina ever began their doomed hike into the San Jacinto mountain range, another man, one which neither of them knew, was gearing up for a hike of his own that would take him through the San Jacinto mountain range. His name was John Donovan, and on April 19th, 2005, which was the day he would begin this journey, he was 59 years old. John had absolutely no family. He was born firstborn and only child, and by the time he was 10 years old, he had been orphaned and basically had to raise himself from that point onward. By the time John was in his 20s, he had moved to Virginia, where he had taken a job as a social worker. And despite making a fairly decent salary, he refused to spend any more money than he absolutely had to. It was a habit he had developed as an orphan child, trying to make ends meet with virtually no money whatsoever, and as an adult, that habit just never left him. So,
I mean, that makes sense. It's best to, always try to save. Don't spend money on stupid shit. I'm still learning that. I'm terrible with money. I am terrible with money. So yeah, it's best to try to spend as little money as you can, except for, make sure you get stuff you really need. But yeah, don't, maybe I'm not one to say anything.
So as a result, for his entire life, all the way up until he left for that hike in 2005, he never had anything nice. He basically wore the exact same outfit virtually every single day. He never owned a car, he never owned a phone, he never owned a computer, and when it...
Okay, see, that's too little. See, that's too far. That's when you go, that's ridiculous. No, see, you need to have at least some clothes on. Don't wear the same outfit every single day. That sounds terrible. I wouldn't want to be near someone. Could you imagine being near someone who wore the same outfit every single day? The exact same outfit. Nothing changes. Not a single clothing change. Nothing. It's just the same outfit every single day. Could you imagine how horrible that person must be to be around? Oh my god. And then never hold a phone. Never has a laptop. Never had a car. That sounds, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a fun person. Especially, at least, you don't want technology to find, at least buy some goddamn clothes.
Came to where he chose to live, he would always live in the most absurdly cheap dwellings possible, which included, at one point, living in a partially burned down, abandoned savings bank.
Okay, what the fuck? Who lives in a... Tell me y'all just heard what he just said. Tell me y'all heard what he just said. He just said, this man used to live at one point in a partially obscure savings bank. What? What the hell? That's a little bit on the extremes. That's too extreme for me.
With no heat. John was a proud Irish Catholic, he drank lots of whiskey, he swore like a sailor, and he had no problem speaking his mind.
I like that part. I love a guy who will say what's on his mind. I love that.
Matter who he was talking to. While he was a lovely person once you got to meet him, his unorthodox lifestyle and his at times gruff exterior made it pretty difficult for him to make friends for most of his life. But when he was in his 40s, he wanted to lose some weight, and so he decided to join a hiking club. And to his surprise, the other members of this hiking club adored him. They thought he was hysterical, and he made being out on the trail so much more fun and enjoyable. And before long, all these members of this club became John's family that he never had.
Jesus Christ, can you see the smirk on this man? This man has a creepy smirk even. What the heck? Look at the smile on this guy's face. It's this one. Look at his smile. Jesus.
And so John would go on every single trip this hiking club went on, no matter what. That was the most important thing to him in his life. When it came to hiking, though, John was a bit of an anomaly. Even though he would hike sometimes over 4,000 miles in any given year, he would still routinely get lost on trails he had been on dozens and dozens of times. But despite being totally self-aware of this fatal flaw in his hiking abilities, John rarely did anything to compensate for it. For example, he didn't bring with him on most hikes a compass, which would be the first thing you would think to bring with you to stay oriented.
Exactly.
Also, because he refused to buy a phone, he didn't have that to aid him either if he ever got lost. In fact, John rarely brought much of anything on any hike he went on, because John is what you would call a ultralight backpacker, which basically meant you would only pack the absolute bare essentials, and in John's case, sometimes less than the absolute bare essentials. And despite his friends trying repeatedly to get him to pack more equipment so he was more prepared, he would always say no, he knows what he's doing and everything is good. And
stubbornness at its finest, let me tell ya, is stubborn as hell. This man is stubborn as it gets, and he ain't budging on the way he does things. He's like, it's the absolute bare minimum. I'm not doing anything else. It's all good.
And the truth is, John always did manage to get from point A to point B on all of his hikes, some of which included extremely difficult hikes, like the time he hiked the 500-mile-long Colorado Trail, or the time he hiked the 2,175-mile-long Appalachian Trail. Now, John would tell you that was all skill, but his friends would say John was extremely lucky. He would get lost, and then at the last second he would find the trail again, or he would lose some piece of critical equipment, and then just someone on the trail would happen to walk by that had an extra set of whatever it was that John needed. And then one time when John was in Poland on a hike, he slipped on this icy embankment where earlier that day, 2 other hikers had slipped and fallen to their deaths. And John has now slipped on this same embankment. He's careening down the sides. He's flailing. He can't stop himself. And then the drawstring on his pants gets caught up in a tree, and that arrests his fall and it saves his life. And so from that point on, John would only wear those pants when he went hiking, and he called them his lucky pants. In the spring of 2000,
of course, he says these are my good pants. These are my lucky pants. If anyone's watching this, can you just answer me a question just so I know? Is my quality good? Is the quality good in the video on the live stream? I don't know if anyone's watching that can give me an answer to this. I'm just kind of curious. Does anyone know? I'm just trying to kind of get a sense on if everything's all good or not. I'll give it time. But yeah, if anyone can let me know, please. That'll be helpful.
2005, John and one of his very close hiking friends named Ken Baker.
Thank you, Gamer. I just had to check because on I'm watching on my phone for the chat because I can't keep checking. That's why I would have to keep minimizing it. So to me, it didn't look the greatest. So I didn't know if it was just my phone or not. So thank you for letting me know.
Who was roughly his age, decided they were going to hike the 2,650-mile-long Pacific Crest Trail. This trail spanned the entire west coast of the United States. It starts in Southern California, right on the border of Mexico, and it goes all the way up to the very northern end of Washington State, right on the border of Canada. It takes the average hiker, if they're going to do this entire trail in one go, about 5 months, unless there's bad weather conditions that impede them along the way. John had been excitedly planning.
Could you imagine hiking for 5 months? 5 months of just hiking. No, I hate hiking just normally. I don't want to do hiking. I don't like hiking sometimes just in general, just for like even like half hour in nature. I'm about 5 months, Jesus. They must really like it.
This epically long hike for the better part of the last year. He'd actually typed out 6 pages on his typewriter of this itinerary that planned out every single detail of this hike, down to...
I wonder when this happened. I wonder if... there's no way. I don't think this probably would have happened at a time where typewriter was the main thing.
How many ounces of coffee he would need at every stop along the way. John was especially excited about this particular hike because it was going to be the very first hike he would be doing after his retirement from being a social worker. And apparently John had huge plans for his retirement. He wanted to travel all over the United States. He wanted to go to Australia, to China, to Russia. He basically wanted to hike at least 6 months a year, every single year, until he was too old or too weak to continue to do so. But just a couple of days before before John and Ken were supposed to fly out to California to begin the Pacific Crest Trail, Ken told John that he thought they should actually postpone the start of this trip by about 3 weeks. He said Southern California had experienced their snowiest winter in decades, and so it would make sense to wait a little bit of extra time to make sure all the snow had melted and that they didn't get caught in any sort of late snowstorm. Now, John was totally not having this. He had spent so much time thinking about this trip. He was so excited about it that
this is stubbornness, ladies and gentlemen. This is what stubbornness is. This guy, this person was like, hey, we should wait about 3 weeks. You know, California, where we're going to be starting this trail, is about to get this big, heavy snowstorm. So it's best to just wait 3 weeks just to make sure all the snow is gone. And this guy ain't having it. He said, nope, I planned this out. I wrote it on my typewriter. I wrote every plan, everything. Despite the fact that it'd be the exact same situation, nothing would change. This guy isn't having it.
he just couldn't wait any longer. And so he told Ken, I'm sorry, I'm going on the current timeline, whether I go alone or not.
That's just stupidity, dude. Just wait 3 weeks. There'd be no difference. There will be no difference in that time frame except less snow and better way to walk it.
And so on April 19th, 2005, John made his way to his office where he was a social worker. His coworkers threw him a very small retirement party, and he literally left the office, went straight to the airport, and he flew to Southern California all alone. When he got there, he took a chance and reached out to one of his other hiking friends, a 48-year-old tool salesman named Lynn Paget, and asked him, hey, I know you live in the area. Would you be interested in coming on at least part of the Pacific Crest Trail with me? I'm going to start here in the next couple of days. And John was extremely excited when Lynn said, you know what? Sure, I'd love to come along with you. And the two of them made their way over to Campo, California, which is right on the border of Mexico, and they began their hike along the Pacific Crest Trail. But after going only about 100 miles, Lynn's feet started swelling so badly that he could not go any farther. And so from that point onward, John would be alone. The San Jacinto mountain range is the first major mountain.
I'm just gonna say that's a beautiful shot of the mountains. That is a beautiful photo. I always do love beautiful photography and that when it comes to nature. That is beautiful.
Range that the northbound Pacific Crest Trail hikers will encounter, and statistically it's actually the most dangerous portion of the Pacific Crest Trail, as 15% of all the fatalities that occur along this huge trail occur in the San Jacinto mountain range. It's a very steep mountain with a rapid rise in elevation from the desert floor all the way up to over 10,000 feet, which means in the summer, even when it's extremely hot down around the base of this mountain, it will probably be windy and snowing at the top. John reached the base of the San Jacinto mountain range on May 2nd, and as he began his slow climb up, all of the hikers he was encountering were all talking about the same thing. There was apparently some big snowstorm that was due to hit the San Jacinto mountain range in the next couple of days, and so all of these hikers were actually evacuating the mountain to go to this little town to wait out the storm. Everyone's fear was they would get caught on Fuller Ridge when the storm hit. Fuller Ridge is towards the top of the San Jacinto mountain range, and it's probably the most dangerous part of the entire mountain range. It's basically this totally exposed, very steep section where if you lose your footing, there's nothing to stop you from tumbling down to your death. But when John heard this, he was...
Yeah, I can understand why people were like, yeah, that area, yeah, that little Fuller Ridge, yeah, I ain't going on that when it's snowstorming. No, I'm gonna make sure I evacuate so I ain't near that area when it snows. They ain't gonna die. They don't wanna die. Apparently this John guy, he gonna risk it just cause he's that damn stubborn.
Wasn't phased at all. He was not about to evacuate because of some storm. He was just going to continue up this mountain, go over Fuller's Ridge, and carry on along the Pacific Crest Trail. And so for the rest of the day, he just continued up the mountain and eventually made camp about halfway up. He actually stopped near two other hikers that were also going to push through despite this storm. It was a 46-year-old nurse from Canada named Connie Davis and her son, 20-year-old Alex. And they were both very experienced high-altitude climbers, and they had all the right gear, and they were very well prepared. And so that night, after both parties had set up their camp, they struck up a friendly conversation, during which John made some dismissive comments about Connie's parenting style that really...
Who the hell criticize anyone's parenting style. What the This guy's just sitting there, meets these two people, and he goes like, you know what, you're a shitty ass parent. I think your parenting style sucks. Dude, you're on a mountain range with someone. Don't you be questioning someone's parenting style. They'd push you down that thing if they give you a shit. Don't insult someone. What a dumbass. Don't make enemies on a mountain. There's Snyder left lesson. There's another Snyder life lesson for you. Don't piss off people on a goddamn mountain.
Agitated her, although it didn't seem like John really noticed he had upset her. And so, needless to say, the next morning, Connie and her son had packed up and were long gone by the time John was waking up. So, John just got up, he looked at the sky, it was still clear, although he did see some gray clouds rolling in, so he could sense that yes, a storm really is on the way, but he decided he was still just going to continue on towards Fuller Ridge. So he put his backpack on and he began walking up the trail, and a little while later, when he was nearing Fuller Ridge, but was still several miles away, 3 very well-equipped hikers that he had not seen before came charging down the path towards him. And John stopped them and he said, hey, how is it up there? What's the weather like? What's Fuller Ridge like? And they kind of looked at John and sized him up, looking up and down, and they saw that, he's got light clothes on, he's got sneakers on, he doesn't have trekking poles, he just looks totally ill-prepared for what he's walking into.
So this guy is going on a snowy mountain range. No, a known snowy mountain range. It's not like it's a unknown. He knows it's going to be a snowy mountain range. He had been warned about a snowstorm that was coming, that could come. And this guy is sorry, my son decided to be a dick. As I was saying, this guy knows all about the snow that's could be on the mountain and it could be coming. And this guy is wearing sneakers and light clothes. I'm sorry, this guy is asking for something to go wrong. This is stupidity at its finest. How on earth did this guy think he was going to end up okay at the end of this?
And they said to him, I don't think it's a good idea for you to continue on here. This storm is going to hit any time now, and we're not going to Fuller Ridge. We're actually turning around and leaving because of the storm, and we have all the right gear. I mean, you should really consider turning around and leaving. But these 3 hikers would say there was just no way they were going to change John's mind. He was totally...
He too damn stubborn. John is too dang stubborn. He too damn stubborn.
Dead set on carrying on to Fuller Ridge. And so the 3 men that had told him not to go eventually just said, okay, good luck. And they carried on down the trail, and John continued up. But despite John's earlier confidence in his plan to go to Fuller Ridge and continue through San Jacinto Mountains, when the snow actually started to fall sometime in the mid-afternoon, John started to have doubts about his plans. There was already a lot of snow on the ground where he was from previous snowstorms, and that was making it hard to see the trail as it was. And now with all this additional snow starting to dump down, he was worried it was he would lose it. And since he knew he kind of had a penchant for getting lost on trails, this was a real concern. But he was still very stubborn, and so despite these second thoughts, he just continued on along. And so after a while, he got to within maybe 1 or 2 miles of Fuller Ridge when he spotted up ahead of him 2 other hikers that seemed to be going in that direction. And so he ran up to them and he yelled for them to stop. And at this point, the snow is really starting to come down and the trail is completely wiped out and he can barely see in front of him. And these 2 hikers, they stop. And so he runs up to them, and when he gets up close, he can see it's actually Connie Davis and her son Alex from the night before. And so Connie is obviously...
Oh God, I'll say these 2 people, they're the 2 people he pissed off. There's the 2 people he pissed off that he made mad on a mountain. And now he probably needs their help. And they might not even help his house. They might leave his house abandoned. He don't even want... Screw you. You insulted. Listen, you're fucking a freaking a-hole to us. Screw you. We're going to leave you on this mountain range. Deal with it yourself.
not thrilled to see John again. But when he explained that he was having a really hard time staying on the trail and, could he just tag along with them, Connie said, you know what, that's just fine. We're happy to have you. But she explained to him she was not going up to Fuller Ridge. Instead, she was taking a more circuitous route that would bypass the ridge. It would take a lot longer, but it would be safer given the weather conditions. John assured her that that was totally fine. He would just trail along with them, and then at some point he would break off on his own, and he would go up to Fuller Ridge, and they could go their separate way. And so Connie, her son, and John begin walking along together. Now, Connie and Alex, they had crampons on their shoes, which are basically like metal cleats and allow you to very easily grip the snow and ice. They had trekking poles, they had all the right warm gear, and so they're easily moving along through these weather conditions. Meanwhile, John didn't have trekking poles or any high-speed equipment. He did have crampons that he tried to put onto his shoes, but because he had sneakers that were not lined up to this type of crampon, they didn't really fit right, and so it caused him to constantly stumble and fall on the ground. And so that's how it went for a while until Connie and Alex reached this critical point. It was at this creek where they needed to go down and around, which would take them away from Fuller Ridge, and if John was going to continue like he said he would up to Fuller Ridge, that would be the point where he would break off from them and go up the mountain towards this ridge. And so Connie and Alex wait at the stream. They're turned around and they're looking back down the trail at John, who's fallen way behind at this point. And as they're looking at him, they're thinking this is going to take a long time for him to finally catch up to clear. He said he is going up to Fuller Ridge. He is an adult. He is healthy. He can do whatever he wants. And so she yelled and waved to John and signaled that she and her son were going to go down this creek and this way to Fuller Ridge, so best of luck to you. And then Connie and Alex disappeared around the corner. Once John's hiking...
It made sense. They abandoned again. They were waiting for him. They were going two different ways. They don't want to be around John anyways. So they were just like, okay, well, we're going down. You go up. See you later. And they just left. They're like, yes, we're waiting for him.
Partners had gone, John got up to that creek and he was going to try to go up to Fuller Ridge, but by that point the snow was practically blinding, and so at this point John decided, you know what, I do need to turn around and go back down the mountain and evacuate to that town where everybody else had gone to avoid the storm.
John finally came to his senses, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give John a big round of applause where he finally came to his senses, at least before he got to Fuller Ridge, before he legitimately just was gonna guarantee most likely fall to his death. I mean, he already had things that were making him slip and fall in the fucking strap, clamp, whatever the heck clamp on thingies for his shoes that weren't actually for his shoes because they're not made for freaking sneakers. And so he is all prepared here. He finally came to his senses, ladies and gentlemen. The question is now, will he be able to actually get back to safety?
And so John turns around and starts trying to backtrack along this trail back down the mountain, but the trail is gone. The snow has completely whited it out, and there's no other hikers anywhere nearby, and even if there were, he wouldn't be able to see them. And so for several hours, while it was still light out, John did his best to navigate down the mountain, and then when the sun went down, he really had no idea where he was. And so instead of trying to stay on this trail that at this point he really didn't think he was on, he looked out away from the mountain, and way down below, he saw this big bright cluster of lights. Even through the falling snow, he could clearly see those were lights of a city. And so he decided he would use that as kind of like his North Star, and he would just continuously walk downhill towards those lights. And so for several hours, he just began walking towards these lights, narrowly avoiding huge drop-offs and climbing over boulders and avoiding trees and animals. And finally, he got to this very critical point in his journey down to these lights. He reached this area called Long Valley where he had a decision to make. He could either continue down the mountain, which would require jumping down into this ravine that once he did, he would not be able to climb back out again. It was too steep. Or he could turn around and hike way back up the mountain and go some other direction. But at this point, he had really no idea what direction was the best direction. All he knew is he needed to go down the mountain because his situation was getting worse and worse by the second. If he didn't find shelter soon, he might get hypothermia and just die out here. And so he decided he would jump down into this ravine. And so he laid on his stomach, he lowered himself down over the edge, and he dropped down into the valley below. Once he stood up, he just continued walking down the mountain, and at some point he spotted a stream that he began to follow along. And as he followed this ravine, which was taking him straight down the mountain, he noticed the ravine walls, these huge walls on either side of him, seemed to get closer and closer to him, like this ravine was kind of coming to a point. And then after a while, he noticed up ahead, the stream just kind of disappeared. And so he walked a little bit farther, and then he came to an abrupt stop. The water had disappeared because it had flown off a 100-foot cliff that he was now standing in front of.
Cliff drop. This guy completely just trapped himself. He literally has no way out now because he said he wouldn't be able to climb back up out of the ravine. Oh, man. Damn, that sucks.
He had come to the edge of this huge waterfall, and there was absolutely no way to lower himself down over it. It was an absolute fall to the death if he attempted to go down this waterfall. And so he looked to his left and he looked to his right, and these huge canyon walls that had followed him all the way to this edge from when he dropped down, they were sheer cliffs. There was no way to climb those. And his initial drop into this ravine was unclimbable. He knew that going in. And so he was boxed in, he was trapped, and he likely knew that it would be at least a week or more before anybody figured out that he was even missing. And so totally disheartened, John left the edge.
He had no way out. He had no way to be saved because no one was going to even notice he was gone for another week. Because like I said, he was going on this long thing. It'd be a week or so before anyone even realized he was missing. He is stuck in this area. He barely has he light packed. So he probably has barely no food, barely no water. Well, he's by a stream, so water's not an issue, but barely no food. He's wearing light clothes, wearing sneakers. This guy is unprepared for this situation at all. This guy is trapped and pretty much is stuck in his death spot. He's not going to be able to get out of this.
Edge of this cliff, this waterfall, and walked back up to a relatively flat area farther up the ravine, and he began to set up camp. He pulled out his green tarp, he put some line between two trees, he made a makeshift roof, he laid out his bed mat underneath, and then he climbed underneath the tarp and he settled in for a long night. The next morning, when the sun came up, John attempted to make a fire, but none of the wood he was finding was dry enough, so all of his fires just kind of smoldered but didn't really catch. He had a mirror, a signal mirror, and he was prepared to flag down any area.
What do you mean by it is, Carly? Like it is his death spot? Is that what you mean? Because there's no way out for him in this situation. This guy came very unprepared. This is what happened. What's unfortunate is this is how my mind thinks. I know it's weird, but this is what my mind thinks. He was meant to be in a situation. That's what I think. I think he was meant to end up in this situation because his unpreparedness. He was so unprepared for a situation like this and weather like this that him going on this thing was just bound to happen. A situation like this was bound to happen. He doesn't deserve to be in this situation, but it was a situation he was going to find himself in where a storm was going to happen and he was not going to be able to get back safety, and his unpreparedness was going to backfire on him. And that's what this is. This is a situation where him being unprepared backfired on him completely.
aircraft that flew overhead, but no aircraft did, so he didn't flag anyone down. And so by the end of that night, he was back under his tarp, having made no progress, settling in for another freezing cold, sleepless night. The next morning, when the sun finally came up again, John was totally disheartened, and he decided to start jotting notes down on the margins of his map, which was the only place he had space to write. He figured he would keep a sort of diary. That way, if he didn't get out of here, someone would figure out what happened to him. And so his first entry was that day, May 5th, and he wrote that his friend Ken was right. He should have postponed this trip by 3 weeks and avoided the bad weather.
Now that I think about it, I wonder if Kylie's like me with live streams. I don't know. I'm not gonna make it like. I'm not saying this isn't a bad thing. I'm just kind of curious because she said it is. Part of me also might just be wondering if she's responding to the fact when I asked if it was good or not. I don't know. But part of me actually wonders she might be like me, because I do this in streams where I go back to the beginning and watch the whole thing through, and that might be the case. I'm not actually sure. I'm just kind of saying things, but now that I look at the chat and I think about what she might be responding to, that might be it.
Ken was the smart one, and also in this May 5th entry, he took an inventory of his food supply. He said he only had 12 cheese crackers left. And then on May 8th, John wrote a note that said, took a fall, too weak to climb out of canyon, down is a gorge, no way out. This was the message that Gina and Brandon discovered when they stumbled on this campsite. But the significance of this note was not literally what he wrote, but rather when he wrote it. On May 6th, Brandon Day and his girlfriend, Gina Allen, were in Palm Springs for a business convention. Brandon was a financial advisor, and so he was out here for business, and Gina was his guest, so she was really just vacationing. And so towards the end of the convention, when Brandon had some free time, he and Gina decided to leave the hotel and go on a hike somewhere. And so they actually linked up with a tour group that was leaving the hotel, that was heading over to this tram station where they were going to take a tram car all the way up to the top of the San Jacinto mountain range. A tram car is basically like a ski lift, except once you ride it to the top of the mountain, you don't do any skiing, you just do sightseeing. And so Brandon and Gina, they get to this tram car, they hop in. You don't do.
I'm sorry, to me, this looks dangerous. I don't know if I could step into it. Could you step into that thing? This seems dangerous to me. I don't know how much trust I'd have in something like this. Maybe this is just me having too much, like, my thing of not trusting almost anything. But to me, this just seems too dangerous for me.
Do any skiing, you just do sightseeing. And so Brandon and Gina, they get to this tram car, they hop inside, they get to the top, and it's totally amazing, beautiful view, there's snow at the top, and they're told they have about 20 or 30 minutes before their group is going to take the tram car back down again. And so Brandon and Gina decide to kind of venture off away from the main group and have some alone time before they leave again, and as they kind of venture off, they start to hear what sounds like a waterfall. And so the two of them are kind of looking around, asking if they can see it or if they know where it is, and they don't. And so they say, hey, do you want to just leave the trail and walk towards this waterfall? It can't be far. It sounds like it's only maybe a couple of minutes away. We'll take some pictures, we'll come back, and then we'll catch the tram back down again. And so they decide this is a great idea. They leave the path.
I wouldn't go looking for a waterfall and that if I have only a short amount of time before I have to get back into the tramp car, whatever the hell it's called, and head back. I wouldn't be going out looking for a waterfall now. No, if it's that short of time, I'm gonna stay nearby and make sure I get in that car.
Path, and they start walking towards the sound of this waterfall. But after walking for a pretty significant distance, they realize the sound of this waterfall is not getting any closer. It seems to actually just be getting farther and farther away. And what they didn't know was happening was the sound of the waterfall was actually echoing off the walls of this mountain. It was basically playing a trick on them. The acoustics made it seem like it was really close, but really it wasn't. It was pretty far away. And so by the time they finally did locate this waterfall, they knew they had ventured fairly far off the main trail, and they really needed to hustle to get back up to the tram station to meet their group and catch that last car out. And so they took a couple of pictures of this waterfall and then quickly turned around and began booking it back towards the station. But on their return trip, which they believed they were going in the right direction, they started hearing the sound of voices coming from the tram station, but they were coming from a different direction. And so Gina and Brandon stopped and they're thinking, I think we got to go this way, but clearly that's the sound of the other people in our group coming from that direction. And so they decide to follow the sound of the voices.
Damn, I couldn't that would be a tough one. Because if your gut tells you you're supposed to go this way, but you hear all the voices coming from a different direction, you would be, well, I know I'm supposed to go one way, but the voices are coming that way, so I want to go that way. But should I just go there, or should I go with the, like, my gut tells me where the voice is actually, I can see why that would be confusing.
But just like the sound of the waterfall, the sound of the voices were not coming from that direction. That was just an echo bouncing off the walls. It was basically a trick the mountain was playing on Brandon and Gina. So they start walking in the wrong direction, and after walking for quite a while and not getting anywhere nearer the tram station, the voices just finally stop. And they look at their watches and they realize they missed the cutoff. They missed the last tram. All those tourists they were with, they've left. They are now alone somewhere out in the middle of the mountains. But they did not panic. They figured, you know what, we'll just make our way to the tram station and we'll either catch the next tram or, maybe there's a payphone or something up there we can use and, we'll figure it out. Now, it's important to mention that Brandon and Gina did not expect to spend very much time out in the elements. They expected to get on a tram, stay at the top of this tram station with a bunch of other tourists where there was a restaurant and a bar, and then they were going to ride that tram car back down and be back at their hotel before dinner time. As such, they didn't bring any supplies. They didn't even have their cell phones. They had left those in the hotel room because they wanted to make sure they were focused on each other.
That's when they become stupid. Anytime you go out in nature, make sure you have a phone, and make sure you got all that, just to be extra certain. Always. But this one makes sense for why they're unprepared. They did not expect to be stuck in the mountains and didn't expect to be stuck in nature because they wanted just a tour group. Their stupid asses just decided to go for a waterfall and ended up going bad on them because of that. But this one makes so much sense compared to John, who just chose to just for some reason be unprepared when going on super long hikes.
And so all they had were the clothes on their back, which were very light. They had tank tops and some sweatpants on. They each had a very light jacket as well. And they had a wallet and some chapstick. They had no water. They had no food. And so Brandon and Gina, they begin walking around in search of this tram station. And for several hours, despite their best efforts, they don't find it. And then before long, the sun is going down and the temperature is dropping rapidly. And so eventually, after it becomes too dark to continue to move around, the couple winds up going into a cave where they huddle up all night, barely avoiding becoming hypothermic. The next day, when the sun comes up, they haven't slept at all. They climb out of their cave and they continue walking around the mountain in hopes they find this tram station. But eventually they get to one of the higher points of the area they were in, and they have a pretty good vantage point around them. And when they start looking out, they don't see the tram station. They don't see anything but wilderness in all directions. And so they decided their best bet was just to walk straight down the mountain and try to just walk off the mountain. And they figured as they began walking down the mountain that the tour guide had probably recognized they were short 2 people the day before. And so certainly a search had been launched and there were people looking for them, and probably they would be found long before they ever had to actually walk off this mountain. But little did they know, their tour guide that had brought them onto the tram and then brought that group down, they had recognized they were short 2 people, but they assumed those 2 people must have just taken an earlier tram, and so nothing was reported. Nobody was looking for them. And so all day, Brandon and Gina made their way down this very steep mountain, falling half the time, smashing into rocks and trees, and getting cut up on manzanita bushes. It was just this awful experience. And by the time the sun was going down, they had no sense of how close they were to the bottom. They didn't have a good viewpoint. They were just kind of trapped inside of the wilderness. And so once again, they huddled up for the entire night. This time they didn't have a cave to protect them from the wind. And so it was just another absolutely miserable night. And so finally the sun comes up on the 3rd day, and Brandon and Gina, they're up and they are moving straight down this hill. They want to get out of there as soon as they can. And after smashing into more boulders and more trees and getting more banged up, they finally arrive at the same drop-off down into a ravine in Long Valley that John had gotten to. And so they're standing over this ravine, debating whether they should make the leap and jump down into this ravine, even though it means they can't climb out again. And so they're looking around, they're figuring, you know what, we don't really have a better choice. We don't really have the energy to climb all the way up and try to go a different way. And we don't even know if those ways are more advantageous. And so just like John, they turn around onto their stomachs, they grip the top of this drop off and then slip down into the ravine. Once they stand back up, they start walking down this ravine and they spot a river, and they run over to the river and they drink as much water as they possibly can. And it's a huge morale booster. And then they get back up again and they're continuing.
Was there a TV show or something made on this? Like, was it part of a documentary or like a true crime TV show or something? Because that's the way it's coming off with these pictures.
Walking down the stream, when off in the distance, they notice a green tarp strung up between trees. It was John's campsite. And so Brandon and Gina, they run over to this campsite and they eventually come across John's notes on the margins of his maps. But after standing up and yelling out for this owner to please come out here and help us, we need your help, we're lost, and then no one came out of the woods, no one heard them, no one responded, Brandon went back to the note and he looked at it again, and that's when he noticed it. The note had been written on May 8th. However, it had been written on May 8th, 2005. The year that Brandon and Gina were reading it was 2006.
What are the odds? What are the odds of that? What are the odds? 1 year apart, they two, that 1 year after John, 1 year to the date, to the fucking date, 1 year after, what are the odds that the note that John left in John's campsite in this ravine that there's no way out of, what are the odds that these two, this couple, would happen to come across it and find it in the same ravine? What are the odds? That is insanity. That is, if you said that to someone, they wouldn't believe you. If you said that to someone, they would not believe you. They think you're crazy. Because there's no, the odds of that are insane. Oh my God.
So this note was 1 year old. John had just happened to get lost and write a note on the exact same calendar day that Gina and Brandon arrived at his campsite and discovered the note. In their initial excitement and joy that they might get saved, they did not pick up on that year discrepancy. The couple began looking more closely at all of the gear underneath the tarp, and they noticed all of the metal objects like the forks and spoons and the pots and the pans, they were all starting to rust. And some of the other objects, like the shoes, looked like they had been sitting in the same spot for a really long time. They both started to get a really bad feeling about this campsite, like something terrible had happened there. Gina emptied the yellow backpack's contents onto the ground, and that's when they found a wallet. They opened it up and they pulled out an ID card, and it was John Donovan's ID card. So now they knew who had written the note and who owned this camp. Afterwards, Gina and Brandon laid out all of the maps to see if there were other messages that they had not read yet. And there were. There were 2 other additional messages after the May 8th message. On May 11th, John said he was celebrating his 60th birthday and that unfortunately he was down to his last 2 cheese crackers. And then in his final message on May 14th, John wrote, "Headed down to creek for water. Goodbye. Love you all." Devastated, the couple knew what they were reading were almost certainly John's last words, and his body was most likely somewhere around here. And then it dawned on the couple that if John, who seemed like an experienced hiker who had all this gear, if he had gotten trapped and died out here, then how did they stand any chance with no experience and no equipment? And so not knowing what else to do, Gina just rounded up all of John's things. She stuffed them into his yellow backpack, and then she shouldered the pack, and then she and Brandon just walked away from John's campsite and continued walking downhill, hoping that up ahead there was not going to be some gorge like John had mentioned in his May 8th note. But unfortunately, after walking for a little while, they reached that cliff with the 100-foot drop, with the waterfall going off the side of it, and they realized that they were trapped, same as John. There was nothing they could do. And so
trapped just like John was. Damn, they were really not expecting to have to be in this situation. My curiosity though is for us to know this story. They would have had to survive, wouldn't they? So, like, how?
They're totally speechless and shocked. They just both sat down. They didn't look at each other, and they just sat there wondering what was going to happen next. And they both were thinking, you know, this could be the place where I die. At some point, Gina kind of snapped out of her trance, and she took John's backpack and she began rifling through it, pulling everything out all over again. And Brandon asked her, you know, what are you doing? And she said, well, you know, maybe there's something in here that we missed. Maybe there's a secret pocket or something in here that could help us. And so she rifles through this bag, and sure enough, she finds inside of a small pocket in the bottom of the bag was another bag, a little plastic bag, and inside of it were matches, and they were still dry. And so immediately the couple pull them out and they start to round up logs to try to make a fire. And as soon as they light it, it doesn't catch because all the logs in the area that were on the ground were wet from previous snowstorms and rainstorms. And so all night they tried lighting these fires, but they all just kind of smoldered out. And so eventually, after the sun went down, Gina and Brandon, who were totally disheartened, they went back up to John's campsite and they went under his tarp and they huddled together for another freezing cold night. The next morning, Brandon woke up because he actually did fall asleep, and Gina was still sleeping. And so Brandon decided to just leave the tarp and go out and get a breath of fresh air. He knew they were in a terrible position, but he just wanted to clear his head. So he stood up and he could barely stand. He was so achy and tired and he was so hungry, and he decided he would just walk down to the edge of this cliff and look out into the valley to see if maybe there was a way down. And so he walked along the river, stopping periodically to get a sip of water until he got to the very edge. And when he got there, he looked down and he saw something that he had not seen the day before. There, in a pool of water all the way down, 100 feet down, was a body lying face down in a pool of water. And that body belonged to John Donovan. Brandon was too far.
Now, the part of me wonders, because that last message is very confusing, because he says he's going to get water, right? And because he said that, my thought was that he slipped off the cliff and fell to his death. But then he says, goodbye, love you all, and that makes me think that he jumped off because he knew he had no way out. I don't know. I'm trying to think, did he, which one it was? I don't know, though. I guess we won't know the answer. What do you guys think, though? Do you guys think he jumped off or fell off?
Away to actually confirm if that really was John, but he instantly knew. But instead of being scared or saddened or depressed by the sight, it kind of invigorated Brandon and reminded him that if he doesn't act, he and Gina were going to die too. And so Brandon decided he wasn't going to set some small campfire to try to signal someone. He was going to try to light the entire forest on fire. And so he walked back up to the campsite and he got the matches out from the backpack, and then he walked into the forest a ways that was right near the river and near their campsite, and he found this tree that was obviously dead, and he walked around gathering as much dry wood as he could, and he propped it up against this dead tree, and then he put as much kindling as he possibly could into this hole in.
I will admit, this is a smart choice. Find a tree, light on fire, because the fire will cause a bunch amount of smoke, and that will cause people to find you. That's actually very, very smart. That's a very smart thinking.
In the trunk of this dead tree. And after doing all this prep work, he got his matches out and he lit some of the kindling, and to his surprise, the tree caught on fire almost immediately. In fact, it burned so quickly and so big that Brandon had to run away so that he didn't catch on fire. And before long, all these trees are catching on fire, and he had to run all the way back to the campsite and wake Gina up. And so he grabs Gina, they get up, and they run all the way over to the edge of the waterfall, and they turn, and they're just watching half an acre just completely erupt in flames. And all this black...
Okay, this is a little extreme. This isn't a real photo, But if this is how much if this is an example of how much they live on fire, that's a little bit too much. That's a little extreme. That's a lot of like a lot of nature you just burned. Like not this much. Don't burn this much. That's a little extreme.
Smoke is billowing up into the sky, and then about an hour later, after the fire had eventually just kind of died out on its own, Gina and Brandon heard the distant rumblings of a helicopter. They had seen the smoke and they were coming to rescue them. Gina and Brandon would be airlifted out of the ravine and would make full recoveries. John Donovan's body would be recovered 3 weeks later. His cause of death could not be determined. Some say that final note he left on May 14th, where he said he was going down to the creek to get water and then said goodbye, I love you all, that was sort of a suicide note, that he actually threw himself off that cliff to end his suffering. Others say he just walked down to the edge of this waterfall and was trying to get a drink of water from the creek when he slipped and then fell over the edge to his death.
Both theories are likely. I actually don't know the answer to this. I don't know which one it was, because both of them have a 50-50 chance. I don't know.
But we'll never know for sure. What we do know for sure is that in 2005, when John Donovan was still alive and missing, had he been rescued, he would have left the valley with all of his supplies, including those matches, which would have meant in 2006, when Brandon and Gina found themselves in that ravine, there wouldn't have been a way to start that fire, and so they would have died. In fact, the helicopter pilot that did come up and rescue Brandon and Gina, he would say there was nobody planning to search that area. This was not an area they believed Brandon and Gina would be. And so it really was only because of that fire that those two lived. As such, the couple said they owe their lives entirely to John Donovan and his unbelievable sacrifice. On July 11th, 2006, a funeral was held for John in Virginia. 80 people showed up for it. Most of them were his hiking friends from his club. After the service was over, they all kind of poured out onto the cemetery lawn around John's gravesite. And as the bagpipes played Amazing Grace, Lynn Paget, the man who had done the first 100 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail with John before his feet swelled up and he had to leave, he walked around the crowd handing out red Solo cups filled with a tiny bit of John's favorite whiskey. And then after making sure all of the adults had their drinks, Lynn went to the head of his very good friend's grave and he delivered a beautiful eulogy. In it, he tells the crowd that he thinks of John all the time, he misses him terribly, and at night he has the same dream. He's walking down this trail next to a stream, and then the stream bends off to the side, and as soon as he walks around the bend, he sees this green tarp. And he knows it's going to be John, and so he yells, "Hey comrade, hey comrade!" And as he's walking over to the tarp, he realizes John isn't there. All it is a tarp, a pack, and some shoes on a rock. As for Brandon and Gina, they did stay a couple after the ordeal, but they would ultimately break up 2 years later. So that's going to do it, guys. If you...
Damn. So this guy has a dream. There's different parts to this, okay? So the couple knows. They say they owe their life to John because if John had been rescued before, if John had been found before and actually survived and was found, they would have not found the supplies they would have needed. So when they got there and they got lost, is because he found the matches and all that. That's what saved their lives. So they owe their lives to John. The one thing that makes the dream, the guy says he always has with a nightmare where he is on a trail near a stream and he sees a tent that he knows is John, and so he runs over to it screaming his name, comrade, and he goes to the tent, and it's just the tent, the backpack, and the shoes. And then also that's an insane thing to have to experience almost probably daily, or just experience in general on a consistent basis. That's just not a good nightmare. Then you have the fact that the two didn't even stay a couple. Like the two people got lost, the boy and the girl that got lost, didn't even stay a couple. They ended up breaking up afterwards. It was too damn dramatic. They end up breaking up. Like, that's insane. It is insane that, like, it went that way. Whew. What insane 2 stories. Like, 2 videos. Whew. There was so much to that. It's insane. Ladies and gentlemen, mainly Gamer and Kylie Nagy, because they're the only 2 that I think that watched this. I hope you all enjoyed the live stream. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments, since I think y'all have left the chat. Let me know what y'all thought of both videos. Part of me might want to do more live streams like this, but I'm not really sure. But let me know what you guys thought. Thank you all for watching, and yeah, thank you, Gamer. I enjoyed it. I enjoy doing live streams. I just it's hard to do because most times no one chats, so it's hard to kind of do a live stream reaction when no one chats, you know. But I am glad you guys joined, Kylie and Gamer. I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. Thank you for the stream. I completely just forgot what I was gonna say. You ever have that your mind just goes blank? That's what I was gonna say something, my mind just went gone, blanked. I got nothing. I literally got nothing. My mind just went blank. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and yeah, I'll see y'all for the next one. Bye, guys.